Can a tiny island nation outwit the world's energy giants? Barbados is making moves you won't believe, not just to survive, but to thrive in a global power game. This Caribbean gem with barely 300,000 people is rewriting the rules of energy independence in ways that have global superpowers taking notice. What they're doing isn't just bold, it's potentially world-changing. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why economists, climate experts, and political strategists are calling Barbados the blueprint for 21st century power. Before we dive in, if you want more content uncovering how small nations are reshaping global dynamics, hit that subscribe button. We're on a mission to reach 10,000 subscribers, and your support helps us bring you these untold stories that mainstream media won't cover. Now let's talk about Barbados. When you think of this island, you probably picture pristine beaches, turquoise waters, and tourists sipping rum punch. That's exactly what the world wants you to see. But behind that postcard-perfect facade, something extraordinary is unfolding. Something that could fundamentally alter the balance of power in the Caribbean and beyond. Here's what nobody tells you about small island nations. They've been trapped in an impossible game for decades. These nations import nearly all their energy, bleeding billions annually to foreign oil companies. They're price takers, not price makers. When oil prices spike, their economies hemorrhage. When hurricanes strike, and they strike often, these islands spiral into debt trying to rebuild. It's a vicious cycle of dependency, debt, and vulnerability. Barbados knows this intimately. By 2020, this nation was generating 93% of its electricity from imported fossil fuels. The island was hemorrhaging $400 million annually on energy imports. $400 million that could have built schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. $400 million representing pure economic leakage. But here's where the story takes a dramatic turn. In 2018, Barbados stood on the precipice of economic catastrophe. National debt had ballooned to over $8 billion. Credit agencies had downgraded the country to selective default. International creditors were circling. The island faced a choice: accept crushing austerity that would devastate its population, or find an entirely different path forward. This is when most nations surrender. This is when leaders typically bow to international financial institutions and condemn their people to decades of hardship. Barbados didn't surrender. Instead, under Prime Minister Mottley's leadership, they did something audacious. They recognized that energy vulnerability wasn't just an economic problem, it was their greatest strategic weakness. And if they could solve that weakness, they could transform it into their greatest strength. This wasn't just about generating electricity differently. This was about fundamentally reimagining what power means in the 21st century. The strategy Barbados unveiled shocked energy experts worldwide. They announced plans to become the world's first completely renewable energy and carbon-neutral nation by 2030. Not reduce fossil fuels, not increase renewables, 100% renewable energy, complete carbon neutrality by 2030. When this landed, skeptics laughed. Analysts called it impossible. Critics claimed it was political theater. After all, how could a tiny island with crushing debt achieve what even wealthy nations struggled with? Here's what those skeptics missed. Barbados wasn't making an empty promise. They were launching a meticulously calculated gambit that would leverage every possible advantage and turn perceived weaknesses into unprecedented leverage. The plan had 3 revolutionary pillars, each more ingenious than the last. Pillar 1. The renewable energy transformation. Barbados, blessed with year-round sunshine and consistent trade winds, sits atop renewable resources most nations would envy. The island receives some of the most intense solar radiation in the Caribbean. Those trade winds that once powered merchant ships now represent inexhaustible clean energy. And beneath the surface, geothermal potential waits to be unlocked. They launched the Barbados National Energy Policy, a comprehensive framework spanning 2019 to 2030. This wasn't vague aspiration. This was a detailed roadmap with specific targets and accountability mechanisms. The government committed to installing massive solar arrays across the island, incentivizing private homes and businesses to become energy producers. They're creating a distributed network where thousands of solar installations feed into a smart grid, making the system more resilient. Wind energy is being deployed strategically along coasts where trade winds blow consistently. But here's the brilliant part. Barbados recognized solar and wind are intermittent, so they're investing heavily in battery storage and exploring green hydrogen production. In February 2025, the European Union partnered with Barbados to launch the Renewable project, integrating solar power with on-site green hydrogen storage. This creates reliable, clean electricity 24 hours daily, regardless of weather. Geothermal energy is also being explored. The government is investigating ways to tap Earth's heat, potentially providing baseload power that runs continuously. This diversified approach ensures Barbados isn't dependent on any single source. They're building redundancy, making the system incredibly resilient. But generating clean energy is only part of the equation. The real genius is in financing this transformation, which brings us to Pillar 2, the debt for climate masterstroke. Remember that $8 billion debt crisis. Most nations would see that as a chain around their neck. Barbados saw an opportunity. Prime Minister Mottley and her team pioneered something revolutionary called debt for climate swaps. Here's the brilliance. Barbados approached creditors with a proposition. Instead of simply restructuring debt, convert portions into climate resilience investments. The nation would receive debt relief, but commit those savings to specific climate projects. In November 2024, Barbados completed a groundbreaking $300 million debt for climate swap. This generated $125 million in fiscal savings, channeled directly into resilience investments. That money is funding critical infrastructure upgrades, including a complete overhaul of the South Coast sewage treatment plant. And here's the kicker. They did this without increasing national debt burden. Think about the implications. Barbados took their greatest weakness and transformed it into leverage. They positioned themselves not as supplicants begging for mercy, but as innovators offering a solution to the global climate finance crisis. International institutions needed a model for how developing nations could address climate change without drowning in debt. Barbados provided that model. The International Monetary Fund took notice. Barbados became among the first nations to receive funding from the IMF's Resilience Trust, securing $183 million specifically for climate spending. This isn't a loan adding to debt. It's long-term, low-interest financing for building climate resilience. Prime Minister Mottley didn't stop there. She took the international stage and fundamentally challenged the global financial architecture. At the United Nations, at climate conferences, she articulated a powerful argument. The current international financial system is rigged against small island states. These nations contributed virtually nothing to global emissions, yet suffer disproportionately from climate change. They're forced to borrow at punitive rates to rebuild after disasters they didn't cause, while wealthy nations that created the crisis access cheap capital. Her advocacy is reshaping global conversations about climate finance. She's calling for debt cancellation for climate-vulnerable nations. She's demanding international financial institutions reform their practices. She's building coalitions of developing nations to push for equity. And because Barbados is backing up these arguments with concrete action and proven results, the world is listening. This brings us to Pillar 3, the economic and geopolitical transformation. Here's where Barbados's strategy reveals its true genius. By achieving energy independence, they're fundamentally altering their geopolitical position. Think about what energy independence means. That $400 million annually spent on imports, it stays in Barbados. It circulates through their economy. It creates jobs. It funds education, healthcare, infrastructure. It transforms from economic leakage into economic stimulus. But the implications go deeper. Energy independence means energy security. Barbados becomes immune to global oil price shocks. When geopolitical tensions spike prices, when supply chains are disrupted, when energy becomes a weapon in international conflicts, Barbados remains stable. They're no longer vulnerable to distant governments and corporations. This stability attracts investment. It makes the nation a reliable business partner. It enhances their credit rating. Now consider the diplomatic leverage this creates. As Barbados successfully implements their transition, they become a model that other small island states will want to emulate. Caribbean nations, Pacific islands, any country facing similar challenges will look to Barbados for guidance. This creates soft power. Barbados can export their expertise, their technology partnerships, their policy frameworks. They're transforming from aid recipients into knowledge providers. The renewable energy sector itself becomes an engine of economic growth. Solar installation, wind turbine maintenance, battery storage management, smart grid operation create skilled jobs that keep talented young people on the island. The nation is investing in education and training programs to build domestic expertise in renewable technologies. They're creating a workforce capable of not just maintaining their systems, but potentially exporting services to other nations. And here's where it gets really interesting. As Barbados demonstrates that 100% renewable energy is achievable, affordable, and advantageous, they undermine the arguments that fossil fuel interests use to maintain the status quo. For decades, oil companies have claimed renewable energy can't provide reliable power, that it's too expensive, that it will destroy economies. Barbados is proving them wrong in real time. Every month, their renewable percentage increases. Every year, their economy grows while emissions fall, weakens the fossil fuel narrative globally. This makes Barbados a threat to entrenched interests worth trillions, but it also makes them invaluable to the growing coalition of nations, businesses, and activists committed to addressing climate change. International corporations want to partner with Barbados. Green technology companies see the island as a testing ground for innovations. Climate-focused investors view Barbadian projects as proving grounds for scalable solutions. The tourism industry, vital to Barbados's economy, gets a massive boost. Imagine marketing your nation not just as a beautiful tropical paradise, but as the world's first completely renewable, carbon-neutral island destination. Environmentally conscious travelers will specifically choose Barbados because of their sustainability commitment. Hotels can advertise they're powered entirely by clean energy. This isn't greenwashing. This is authentic sustainability that becomes a genuine competitive advantage. But perhaps the most profound transformation is psychological and cultural. For decades, small island nations have been told they're powerless. They're told to accept their position in the global hierarchy. Barbados is rejecting that narrative completely. They're demonstrating that smart strategy, bold leadership, and innovative thinking can overcome enormous resource disadvantages. They're proving that small nations can be leaders rather than followers. This shift matters enormously. When Barbadian children see their nation pioneering solutions to global challenges, when they witness their leaders commanding respect on the world stage, it fundamentally changes their sense of possibility. It creates a culture of ambition, innovation, and confidence that will drive development for generations. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Can Barbados actually pull this off? Achieving 100% renewable energy by 2030 is extraordinarily ambitious. There are legitimate technical challenges. Intermittent sources require sophisticated storage solutions. Upfront capital costs are substantial. Climate change itself poses risks, as hurricanes can damage renewable infrastructure, and political risk always exists. But here's what skeptics consistently underestimate. Barbados has already overcome challenges that should have been impossible. They restructured their debt and improved their credit rating from selective default to investment grade within years. They pioneered entirely new financial instruments now being studied globally. They built political consensus across parties for their energy transition. They secured international partnerships most small nations couldn't access. And the momentum is undeniable. Renewable energy penetration is increasing steadily. Solar installations are proliferating. International partnerships are expanding. The Debt for Climate model is working exactly as designed. Every success creates momentum for the next phase. The transition has achieved escape velocity. Even if Barbados doesn't hit the precise 2030 target, the transformation is real and irreversible. They've already fundamentally altered their energy landscape. They've demonstrated that small island states can lead. They've created models other nations are adopting. The question isn't whether Barbados will achieve energy independence. The question is how quickly, and what that success means for global power dynamics. Because here's the bigger picture. The international order established after World War II concentrated power in large, wealthy nations. The global economy was built on fossil fuels, and whoever controlled those resources wielded enormous influence. Small nations were expected to accept their subordinate position. That order is crumbling. Climate change, renewable energy technology, and innovative financing are scrambling traditional power equations. Barbados represents something revolutionary. They're demonstrating that strategic thinking and innovative policy can compete with traditional hard power advantages like large populations or abundant resources. They're showing that aligning with global imperatives like climate action can generate diplomatic influence exceeding your economic weight. They're proving that debt can be converted into leverage when combined with bold vision. This has implications rippling far beyond the Caribbean. If Barbados succeeds, dozens of similar nations will follow their playbook. Pacific Island states facing existential threats from sea level rise. African nations blessed with sunshine but cursed with energy poverty. Southeast Asian countries vulnerable to climate disasters. These nations have been watching Barbados closely. They're learning from Barbadian innovations. They're preparing to implement similar strategies. Imagine a coalition of 50 or 60 small nations, all achieving energy independence, all using innovative climate finance, all building diplomatic influence through climate leadership. Individually, these nations might be dismissed. Collectively, they represent a new power bloc that could shift global negotiations on climate, trade, development, and finance. Barbados isn't just transforming itself. They're potentially catalyzing a broader realignment of global power. Major international organizations have embraced Barbados's approach. The United Nations highlights them as a climate leader. The IMF uses them as an example of innovative resilience financing. The Inter-American Development Bank points to their Debt for Climate swap as a breakthrough. The European Union is directly investing in their renewable infrastructure. These aren't symbolic gestures. These are substantive endorsements from institutions that shape global policy. And this creates a fascinating dynamic. Traditional geopolitical powers are now competing to partner with Barbados, not because of the island's economic size or military capability, but because association with their climate success provides legitimacy. China, the United States, European nations all want to be seen supporting Barbados's transition. This gives the island extraordinary leverage in negotiating partnerships, accessing technology, and securing favorable financing. Think about how unprecedented this is. A nation of less than 300,000 people, with a GDP under $6 billion, with no military to speak of, is commanding attention and resources from global superpowers, not through military alliance or resource extraction, but through innovative policy, moral authority, and demonstrated results. This is soft power at its most potent. This is what 21st century influence looks like. The transformation extends to every sector. The financial sector is developing expertise in green bonds and climate finance instruments. The education system is reorienting to produce skilled workers for the renewable energy economy. The government is building institutional capacity for managing complex international partnerships. The private sector is innovating in sustainable business practices. This comprehensive transformation is what separates Barbados from nations that make impressive climate commitments but fail to deliver. This isn't a single flashy project for international publicity. This is a fundamental rewiring of how the nation produces and consumes energy, how it finances development, how it positions itself internationally, and how it envisions its future. Prime Minister Mottley has become an international figure, regularly featured at major global forums. Her speeches widely quoted, her advocacy reshaping debates about climate finance and global equity. But the real strength is that it doesn't depend entirely on any single leader. The institutional changes, the infrastructure investments, the international partnerships, the domestic support create durable foundations that will persist regardless of political shifts. And as Barbados approaches key milestones, as renewable percentages climb toward that 100% target, as their economy demonstrates resilience and growth, the proof becomes undeniable. Skeptics who claimed this was impossible will be forced to acknowledge reality. Nations that hesitated to follow Barbados's lead will rush to catch up. The playbook Barbados is writing will become required reading for any nation serious about sustainable development. The implications for global power are profound and still unfolding. We're witnessing the emergence of a new category of international influence. Climate leadership, demonstrated through actual achievement rather than empty promises, is becoming a source of power. Nations that successfully navigate the energy transition will gain diplomatic leverage, economic advantages, and moral authority. Nations that cling to fossil fuels will find themselves increasingly isolated. Barbados positioned itself at the forefront early. They recognized the opportunity before most nations understood it existed. They moved decisively when others were still debating. They took risks that other nations lacked courage to attempt. And now they're reaping rewards that extend far beyond anything most observers predicted. So can a tiny island nation outwit the world's energy giants? Barbados isn't just outwitting them. They're making them irrelevant. They're building a future where fossil fuel dependence is a relic, where energy security comes from domestic renewable resources, where small nations leverage innovation rather than kowtow to powerful interests. They're demonstrating that the game has changed, that the old rules don't apply, that strategic vision and bold action can overcome.